We are many and we will not be silenced. We are many and we will not be silenced. We are many and we will not be silenced.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Hi, witches. Happy New Year. So I think we probably teased this on the Instagrams and whatnot, but we're going to start doing full moon episodes of Witches Found. We just got so excited by the people that we're meeting, and we just wanted to spend more time with all of you. So this is the first episode of that, and that also means if you're listening to this and you've been like humbly working your magic in some dark, powerful corner somewhere and thinking, I should probably reach out to them. I have some cool stories to tell. We want you to know that we would like you to do that, please. Hello, friends.
We
Hello,
want to
coven.
talk to all
Hello,
of you.
sisters. Come on. So that's my welcome and my plea. And with that, let's introduce the first of our full moon witches found.
Yes. Before I let you speak, Melissa, I heard about your doc through Loretta, a.k.a. the Death Witch, who lives in the States. Mm-hmm. But as it turns out, we actually have friends in common, and you happen to be in Montreal.
Exactly.
And so here we are. Don't you all just love being a witch?
It's the Montreal connection. So, yeah, I found out that you guys were Canadian, and then somehow, how did we figure out the connection? But if you're from Montreal, you know someone from Montreal.
Yeah,
you're only like
sure.
one person, detached.
I'll tell you how it went for me. My girlfriend, that is also a girlfriend of yours, wrote to me and was like, a friend of mine is working on this documentary. I should put you guys in touch. And I was like, oh yeah, definitely. And then I was like, wait a second, is this that witch documentary? And she was like, I think so. And then before she even wrote that message, you wrote to us.
Wow.
And I was like, actually.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I thought for a second, I was like, okay, if they're from Montreal, we're going to have that connection. But it was really cool to find out that, I'm in Vancouver, you guys are here, my producing partner's in Toronto, but somehow like we're all touching on this subject and coming together and magically meeting each other, which is awesome, so awesome. So that's why I wanted to meet you in person, because I'm tired of the internet. And I want real life connections. I want to see people, So I'm so glad to be here today.
And I mean, seeing people is a good intro to your documentary, because it's a film documentary. I mean, we're all kind of doing the same project where we're going around and gathering stories from witches, and ours happens to be in podcast form. Yours is a visual medium. Is that part of it, that you wanted to go and meet these people in person?
Definitely. I mean, a huge part of it is once I started looking into this subject as a doc subject and not just as something that was like in my own life in various ways, I started reaching out to witches, I guess mainly in the U.S., and realizing that every conversation I had was blowing my mind. And I was like, this is incredible. And I felt alive for like the first time in a long time. I was like, I'm not alone. I'm not my worldview is shared by so many other people, and there are people that I totally respect and want to have really long Skype conversations with. So the initial research phase of our project, before I guess now we'd say we're in development to production, was lots of Skype interviews. So me and my partner, we Skyped Brie Luna, we Skyped Chani Nicholas, we Skyped with Michael Hughes, the Bind Trump amazing dude who I could talk to for hours, the House Witch in Salem. So we reached out, Pam Grossman, people like that, and who everyone had their own take. The film is very much about magic resistance, so there's always a political kind of leaning to the conversations that we've been having. But I just felt like something clicked in my own brain and in my own life, and very similar to your podcast where you're looking for these missing witches. I didn't even know I was missing them. I just was like, I felt alive, basically. And so that was 2 years ago. The nice thing I think about Missing Witches is you guys can do this setup it's pretty reasonable, like financially, it's sustainable. The annoying part about the documentary that we want to make is that it's going to cost like almost $1 million, or it could cost anywhere between $400,000 to $1 million. And so fundraising is like a huge thing that we've been working on. And both me and my partner, Sarah Sharkey-Pierce, we are moms. We have busy lives. We have jobs. And so we've been doing this kind of on the side of our desk, so to speak. But we're unable to like let go. It's just been driving us and getting us through, and something that we're so dedicated to. So, so here we are. It's been a long journey. It's been an amazing
that
journey.
Your doc has like a political thrust, and obviously Risa and I believe that witchcraft and activism are inexorably linked. But can you tell us the little story, and you don't have to mention any names of any company names, but the story about having a meeting?
Yeah, so part of the pitch process is, approaching different broadcasters, different funding organizations, and kind of showing them your demo and explaining to them who your characters are and what you're following. And we have been told that we have too much of a political lean, that our idea of a witch isn't necessarily everyone's commodification of the witch. And so maybe that's why it's been harder for us. Because sometimes people are like, well, why is there a man in this documentary? Or, this isn't kind of how I picture witches. And it's like the people that we want to follow in our doc, we think are, a perfect kind of slice of life of the witch community. And there are queer witches and trans witches. It's a very intersectional cast. We want people to see the stakes. We want people to see why people are using witchcraft, and how it affects them, and how the current political situation affects them personally. So not to rag on anyone, and we're sitting here and we're all white women, but this isn't necessarily a white feminist witch documentary that everyone wants to see of a certain generation, I would say. So this is like the new real deal witchcraft. What people are doing now and why they're using witchcraft is, if you study it and you go back in time, like they hexed Hitler. They have been, magic resistance is something that's happened throughout the ages. This isn't like a new phenomenon, and it always comes up when people feel the most oppressed. And one of the reasons why we wanted to start with conjure and hoodoo and I guess like Southern American magic, even though that's really not like our story to tell, and that story will be told by a Black director, and we will be hiring someone who will be telling that story with us. But the reason we wanted to start there is because the roots of that magic are that magic is rooted in oppression. So we thought it was the most logical place to start to tell that story. I sometimes don't like talking about it because I'm white, But so that's why in our film we have like Dr. Beverly Smith, who is a conjure doctor, who can tell her story, and she can talk about how conjure and hoodoo was brought over here by African slaves, and how that magic was used to protect, to make someone invisible, to ward off, whatever was the thing that was going to happen to them that day. It was stuff that was really needed, and that magic has permeated the rest of North American magic, or American magic, and is now being used all over the place because people are feeling that oppression again. So Loretta, the Death Witch, was kind of my conduit, like my person into that world.
The witch is the rebel. The witch is the person that isn't afraid to stand alone. The witch is the person that's not afraid to stand, period. The witch is the person that stands in their own truth and fights back and is willing to risk it all to just hold their own power.
Loretta, the Death Witch, along with another witch, Kook Teflon, who was from Seattle, and she moved to New Orleans. And they kind of hooked me up with a lot of really interesting people who could talk about that. That's not my world to talk about. But we think it's a really important place to start, because that's like that is magic resistance.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, we're all sort of kind of journalists in what we're doing. You know, Risa and I don't pretend to be the high priestesses of the universe.
Of anything.
Of anything, you know, or that we even practice conjure, but we definitely know how important it is to the story of magic. And so that's how I get around that feeling of imposter or this is not my story to tell, is that number one, I certainly don't want to only be telling white stories.
Exactly.
I mean, my God, that's the last thing I want. I don't find that particularly interesting. But secondly is that, again, we're sharing information. And we're going and we're talking to people who practice for real.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And it's like a way in, and I think it's an important part of that story. I guess, yeah, like my own background, I guess I was very goth growing up. So, you know, I dabbled and I've done spells on bosses in my 20s. And, you know, I kind of I've always been really in the rock and roll punk metal scene, like Hail Satan, stuff like that. But I've never...
of intersection there, yeah.
Exactly. And I think my first kind of encounter or experience with witchcraft was my friend's mom growing up, the filmmaker Donna Reed. So she made 3 films for the NFB. That's
the National Film Board of Canada, for those of you who aren't listening from this country.
It's like PBS, I guess, kind of, yeah. So she made The Burning Times and then the Goddess Trilogy. And, I mean, I remember being a teenager and thinking to myself, like, so this woman is a witch and a documentary filmmaker, and how do I become that? And here I am.
And here you are.
Yeah, so she was one of the first people that I reached out to. She's a very close friend of Starhawk, and she's been involved in the reclaiming community since, you know, the very early days.
And just as an aside, if you haven't seen The Burning Times, it's on YouTube or on the NFB website. You can watch it for free, so please do.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing there is a lot of the information in The Burning Times has now, not all of it was fact.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff came out between then and now that has kind of shone a light on, you know, numbers and facts that maybe aren't as true as they used to be. But, you know, people thought they were true then, and that's really the important thing. But those films had, you know, Margot Adler and like all kinds of really interesting witches in them. And yeah, I digress. So
I decided you wanted to be a witch documentarian.
Exactly. No, so I reached out to her, and the first person she put me in contact with was Starhawk, and she was like, you've got to help Melissa. She's a struggling filmmaker, and you've got to get her an interview. And it was so cute, and I felt really like it was the first thing I tried to do, and it had gone so well. Wow. And so we were in touch with Starhawk, and we have plans to interview her. She's obviously super busy. Yeah. But then that was like, you know, the first door that we opened. And then we just decided, like, you know, why not try to tell the definitive story? Like, let's reach out to the biggest witches, the most interesting, the real witches who can tell the definitive story. Not just, you know, I think in the early days we were thinking, like, you know, let's find an interesting coven, maybe in Canada, who are doing some cool stuff. And we were like, but why not make an update of The Burning Times? Like, why don't we go back and say, this is how things were going in the 80s, and this is how we viewed feminist witchcraft in the 80s. How do we see it now? Has it evolved? It has evolved a lot. And, you know, they were pioneers, and people like Starhawk pioneered this movement, but we have a huge opportunity now to show how much it's grown. Yeah. And we also have access to some witches that, you know, like the crones and the guides and the teachers of this generation and movement who are still here and can still offer that insight. Yeah. So we really wanted to make sure that we had a cross-generational cast, and so hopefully we'll be able to do that too. I did talk to Maxine Sanders in London, who had very close ties to Gerald Gardner, and like she's very, you know, the early Wiccan days. It was an amazing conversation, but you know, just thinking that people have been doing things like the hex on Hitler, and this happened, like they really believe, you know, the cone of power that they did prevented Hitler and the Nazis from coming to England. And you're like, there's a legacy here. There's a huge story to tell. So we're hoping that, that's the story we're aiming to tell. Mm-hmm. So like, how do we go back to the burning times and say, where have we come from there? And then, like sometimes I'm like, well, we have an opportunity with like digital media to host all kinds of stuff. So you can have a broadcast documentary that's an hour and a half long, but who's to say how much archive stuff you could host somewhere that becomes a real resource, like what you guys do, like in fact, like it's a resource, like for research and for people to learn and go back to, and it's a document that stays there. Yeah. And I think like since nothing's really been done like that since probably the Goddess trilogy. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, for us it was like to educate ourselves. We didn't really think anybody else would listen so much. So it's been, you sort of reference like having these interviews and feeling all the hairs on your body stand on end because you're like, this is the thing. Like, this is the thing that I thought was out there. Yeah. This is the, like, living, breathing. This is the way to talk about magic that makes sense. Well, I'm talking to you right now, and I want to tell the story of how we ended up in this artist studio, because shining behind you, there's this, like, beautiful spiral string painting. It's completely elaborate, and it's like humming with the life of the magic of these women behind you as you talk. It feels really intense. Oh, wow. But we were looking for a place to record our Yule special and to get to meet with you and post it on Instagram, and someone tagged an artist who has a space in the same studio that we were going to be, and she invited us to come be here because she's a listener. And Jennifer Hamilton is this incredible artist. We're surrounded by these like spirals and pentagrams and plants.
Crystals and incense.
And you realize that like even in your friend network, there were people quietly practicing. Like even people one step removed from you. There were women that you were hanging out with at parties that I wouldn't bring my private ritual to a conversation at a party, like I wouldn't bring my seeking or my feeling that like I miss religion but I don't want one of those ones, those aren't things that come up for me that often. But in doing these podcasts to get to meet these witches is like incredibly powerful. I wonder if you would tell us things that they told you, or moments that stand out in your mind where you were like you felt the cone of power go up around you.
That's a tough one, because I think like every time I interview with someone, I feel like we go into almost a trance where we're communicating so freely about so many different things, from like talking about justice and freedom work and emotions and just how hard it is to wake up in the morning, or you really get I think a lot of witches once they connect, or once you connect with someone where you realize that you're both kind of on the same wavelength, you go places in the conversation that you're never expecting. I think it's hard to say to answer that exact question, but every time I feel like it's a new adventure, so it's like really exciting. And also just getting to know myself through the conversations. So like when you said you're learning, for me, like I definitely, that resonates, because every time I learn something about someone else's practice that I didn't know, or I couldn't put into my own practice, or I can learn more about. And then I think the biggest thing for me is the empathy. And especially, not only with women, but I think witches in general, these days there tends to be like a very strong community and feeling of support. And I feel like that is something that I'd never really experienced as strongly. So I'd say that's the stuff that's really impacted my life. Like it's changed who I am in like lots of different ways. Just that knowing that you're not alone, and knowing that everyone has your back in this, and everyone wants this story to be told the right way, and there's room for everyone to have their perspective heard, and there's so much honor that comes with that, and so much patience for one another that you don't find in regular society, you know? So, but I can't think of one thing that stands out right now. I mean, I can think of people that have blown my mind. So like Ilva Mara, who from the Cunning Crow Apothecary in Seattle, she is an incredible witch who has become like someone who I turn to for advice, and she's been with us on this project kind of since the early days.
We are many and we will not be silenced. Mayor Jenny Durkin and those you've elected and appointed to your office, we find you guilty of crimes against the most vulnerable members of this city. By permitting the gathering of Jolie Gibson, Matt Marshall, and their followers, you are guilty of white supremacist terrorism and collusion with Nazis.
Ilva Mara, also Dr. Beverly Smith, who's in the, we have some clips of her on our Instagram.
What Conjure aims to do is to control the oppressor, to flip the narrative, to give power to those who are powerless. So when I say resist magically, there's physical resistance, like when I and others go and protest in public, walk the streets, do sit-ins in front of the police department. And then there's magical resistance when I take effigies of the police and bind them with snake shed and go throw their ass in the graveyard.
It's just people that you're like, I just feel honored to know them, you know? And I feel,
I felt my heart rate increase when I watched those clips of Dr. Beverly.
Yeah.
Like, immediately. She's very powerful.
She's very powerful. Yeah. And that interview, I remember, like, I barely said anything. And I was just kind of like, it just came out of her, and me and our DPs just sat there like, wow. Like, and same with Professor Porterfield. Like, you really just sit there, and the interview, a lot of times, there's not that many questions. They have these nuggets of information and knowledge that they blow your mind with, and you just kind of feel lucky that you are able to talk to them about it so closely. And you know, it was like that for me, I guess, when I did a doc about gentrification and punk venues in Vancouver closing, and I got to interview some people for that doc, like Ogre from Skinny Puppy, and I remember it was the same feeling when I interviewed Ogre. I was like, oh my god.
And sorry, the name of that documentary was No Fun City. No Fun City, check it out.
Yeah, and I remember, actually, when I interviewed him, I got the interview through a friend who was promoting the show, and I did this amazing interview with him because he was from Vancouver, just about having space to congregate and play shows and music. And there's a lot of parallels with, you know, needing community and needing to, you know, I often thought, like, rock and roll was kind of like church for me. I went every weekend, and I worshipped at the altar of whatever band I was watching, and I saw the same people, and we all had this kind of, you know, when I had my kid, I stopped going out as much, and I think that's really where I kind of turned into it. It shifted a little bit, and I found that I could access a different part of me, and that's where witchcraft has become really useful for me now. But anyways, when I interviewed Ogre, he afterwards was like, well, that was a great interview. What's this for? And I was like, I don't know. Amazing. It's like a documentary that I'm thinking about, you know, and he looked at me and was like, you're going to do this. He was like, this is good, and you're just going to keep going, and I believe in you. And I mean, I think I was like 28 or something at the time, and I was just like, okay, Ogre said I had to do it, so I was just going to, you know, and I made that film against all odds. It was very low budget, and it was, you know, it did really well, and it was such a big part of my life. And I haven't made a film since then, because I feel like I only get making a film where you're funding a lot of it and doing a lot of it yourself is almost as demanding as having a baby. Yeah. And I had a kid and was like, I can't do that at the same time. And now that my kid's a bit older, I was like, I feel like I have the space in my life for that. But it's everything. Yeah. Like, you don't stop working for 1 minute of the day. You're thinking about your project. You're growing this huge thing, and you're worried about it. It's just, you know, you're putting it out into the world. And all you do is think about this project, and for me, that's the kind of filmmaker I am. So I can't make films all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I really and I like to make films that are close to me and, like, have my perspective in them, so that I feel like I'm not just making this for no reason. Like, I want to document life as I see it, and how the people around me see it, and I hope something really useful comes out of the art, you know? Something that can be used as a statement. And with No Fun City, it did. I mean, we affected venue legislation in the city. All kinds of stuff happened because of the film, and that was why it was so important to make. And that's why so many people agreed to be in it, kind of like with this project too, is that there's such a will for this to get out there. And so, you know,
I was going to say, I think there are a lot of parallels, like you were saying, between, like, the punk scene and your, like, anti-gentrification doc, and then this witchcraft, which is, again, it's very punk. It's about disruption, but also about community.
And it's inherently anti-capitalist and anti-fascist.
Exactly. And that's kind of how, like, my progression in my own life is, like, mirroring the progression, like, you know, the projects that I decide to kind of dedicate everything of all of my energy to. So, like, that's why, like, I like to be genuine. Like, almost to a fault. Maybe it's a Montreal thing, but we don't like bullshit. You know?
No, we don't. One thing you'll notice if you ever come to Montreal, you will probably have a new best friend within 48 hours, and she might be a mean auntie.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's the next step? I know you're in process right now. What's your next move? Are you just going to hoard interviews until you get the budget to...
Yeah, so we don't have... I guess we're at a point now where we're waiting to hear back to see if this film is something that could be funded by a more mainstream broadcaster funding agency or whatever. And if not... then it's going to be probably not look as good because we've been really fortunate to work with this, you know, an incredible team and an amazing camera, and to keep up that look and that quality that we really want to put into this project costs a lot of money. Yeah. So we're at this weird kind of wait and see period. But we also really want to develop our stories. So we don't want this to be talking heads telling you about what's happening in the world. You can go on the internet for that. So a big part of what we're trying to do now is to take that kind of look and feel that we've developed and shoot with characters for longer periods of time. So that we get to know them, so that we get to learn about their craft through them, and we get to learn about the stakes through their personal journeys. And so that's what we're hoping to do. And I think we'll probably be doing shooting with Ilva, who I live out west and she's not far, and that becomes like just a story that we've, or a person that means a lot to us, but a story that we've been following for a long time. And then Dr. Beverly is also someone that we would like to do some more immersive stuff with. So we'll see. It all depends on, lighting those green candles and sending the energy out, everybody.
Let's end with a spell or an incantation or a summoning together, okay?
Okay.
Just like wherever you are, light a little green candle.
Please.
Light a little, like put some coins out, put some money out, put some fancy money out. And just let's all, you're listening to this on the January full moon. And the fullness of the year is sort of fat with promise with us in this moment right now. And we have this image of these lights of witches all lit up all over the world. Mm-hmm. And we have this witch filmmaker here with us, and her voice and her story and her labor and her effort and her energy and her sweat and her tears and her motherhood, all bringing her work to tell our story. And all of our own stories want to be told, and we all want to tell them in the fullest of flourishing. So breathe in and feel that flame and send her your energy and love and feel her sending it back to you in your fullest flourishing.
Oh my God.
Happy January full moon.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone who is listening, who is following along with this, we thank you. We have so much gratitude. And all we want is this, we want to be able to tell the story in the most honest, genuine way possible. And we love you. Thank you.
I will post all the links to her website and her Instagram and everywhere that you can start to see this documentation that they've been gathering for all of us of our movement.
And in the meantime, you're on Instagram at Witch Documentary.
Yeah.
Correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
So please, everyone, go follow them. Get them some heavy numbers so that when they go to the capitalist...
Yes, exactly.
When they go into capitalism to try to get some of that sweet, sweet capital, they'll have some numbers behind them.
I know.
Because that's the only thing they understand.
It does seem daunting. You're like, we're asking the people for money to show them the reason why this is all wrong. Yeah, good luck with that.
Please give us the money to take apart your system, sir.
Yes.
And good day to you.
But again, I mean, let's go back around to that interview that you had with the... and they said that your documentary about witchcraft was, quote, too political, and that they wanted to make something lighter. Oh.
I mean, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus or any other projects. I really believe there's room out there for like 10 documentaries about witches.
100.
There is exactly 100. There are so many different angles, stories, and I'm sure that the story that they come up with will be a genuine, but I think like we are living in a really fucked up world right now, and we're seeing a resurgence of witchcraft because of that. And so to remove that element of politics from the story is kind of doing a huge disservice to what we're all out here trying to do. So, I'm not going to say that there aren't other ways of I don't want to just bitch. I don't want to... I feel like, there should be lots of different ways to look at this, but the most important way right now is hex the patriarchy and fucking mean it. There's a reason we're all out here doing this, and there's a reason we're connecting and trying to make groups, and we're activists and we're at protests, but we're also doing healing work and taking care of each other, and that's the real story, not 90s Morticia Adams, goth, witch, Wiccans. That's done. That's not what the witch is about at all anymore,
Yeah, and it's not multi-level marketing selling you essential oils.
Oh, it's definitely not
no,
that.
It's not that.
It's not that,
No. And it's gritty, and maybe that scares people.
And it's harder to sell, like, here's some fury-making, horrible...
Exactly.
Versus like, oh, just cover your ears and everything's going to be good vibes only.
Here are some characters you can't probably relate to because their lives and stories are way more intense than yours. But that's the beauty of documentary, is like being able to open up those worlds for people. Yeah. And it creates empathy. And that's like why you do it too, right? Yeah. Anyone talking about the subject is going to bring something good. There's something good's going to come out of it. But for us, maybe we're scaring people a little bit, but I think that's a good thing. Yeah. And that's where I want to be. That's where I feel comfortable as a filmmaker. The more funders that say no, sometimes you're like, okay, good, I'm doing the right thing. Because if they were like, oh, cool, then you're like, what story am I telling? Because they shouldn't be that ready to jump in.
Right. A documentary about how everything's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Witches are pretty and everything's fine.
Let's pretend that's true for just 1 second now. Let's take 2 seconds on this January full moon to just pretend everything's fine. Okay, now back to Fury. Thank you so much, Melissa. Can you shout out your creative partner one more time?
Yes, Sarah Sharkey Pierce. So she is my partner on this project. She's an amazing queer filmmaker, activist, super talented, brilliant person who is half of this project. She is, this not just me. She is the total other half of me on this journey. She's been there since the very beginning. So she couldn't be here today, but she's always with me. So
let's say her name one more time.
Sarah Sharkey Pierce. Sharkey. That's how she goes, by Sharkey.
Oh, Sharkey, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa. We wish you all the best of luck and fortune and good vibes and fury.
Yes, all the fury.
And hopefully this shit gets made and all of our listeners can
It will, like one way or another, it will.
Yeah.
It's just how it'll take shape is what we're waiting to find out now.
And I think that's a pretty good metaphor for life. It's gonna keep going. It's just how it's gonna take shape.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.
Much for being.
Happy full moon, everybody.
Happy full moon.
We are many and we will not be silenced.
You must be a witch.